All right, I'm back with another episode, and today I'm joined by Dr. Christine Marie, who is in Utah, United States of America. Um, Thanks for taking the time out to talk to me.
My pleasure.
So
I'm
you're a researcher with a doctorate in psychology, and your interests are particularly in humiliation, public shaming, cancel culture, and media misrepresentation. Is that correct?
That's true. That's true.
So anyone who's been following me online for the last year will know that I've got a real interest in understanding these topics. So I really appreciate you, a bona fide expert, talking with us about it. Thank you.
Well, I'm honored to be on your podcast. You are amazing.
Well, that's very
Post
kind.
the best thing. Sometimes you put up a post that just nails it, and I have to share it with all my people.
Well, I think that's the good thing about the internet, right? Because we're going to be talking about the downsides of it, but it is really nice to find like positive, helpful online communities that can improve our lives, right? But there's obviously a dark side to that, which I guess we're going to get into. So before we get too ahead of ourselves, what led you to your research? What led you to your doctorate? Like, where does this journey begin for you?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. It's quite a roller coaster of a story, but essentially, I'm a survivor of human trafficking. And I mean, years and years ago, but it was a sensational true crime story. So, of course, the media shows up and lures me to share my story, which I thought, well, this is perfect. It was supposedly going to be on a reputable network with an award-winning production company. And they said the series was about the power of the human spirit to overcome extreme psychological adversity. So I thought, well, maybe now I should tell my story. All the conditions seem just right. So I told my story on camera during 3 different filming episodes. And what I was told was not what happened. In fact, the series I saw online, it was described as a series about people who were manipulated into committing horrific crimes. And I thought, what crime did I commit? I mean, I'm not just a survivor of sex trafficking. I have a case number. I have validation from the Human Trafficking Resource Center in the United States, which is a national thing. I provided all that evidence. But they manipulated my story to make it look as if I was quite culpable for my own abuse.
Oh, wow. So did they end up airing it as such? Like
They did air it. They did air it like that. They even brought on an actor who was a friend of mine. They asked for a person who knew me before my trafficking experience, who could explain what I was like beforehand. And so I had a friend, and he didn't know what had happened to me. I told him on the way to the interview, like a brief overview of what happened, but that didn't matter because he was supposed to be talking about what I was like beforehand. He didn't really need to know my story. But when he was on camera, he told me that he was coached and pressured to say certain things, and he felt really bad about it. And when it aired, we have this actor on camera that was portrayed as if he was a witness at the time, as if I was confessing things to him. And it was highly victim shaming. And he even used degrading words about me, which just knocked the wind out of me because he didn't even know my story, let alone, have the right to really be commenting on what happened at the time and where my head was. That was all just a matter of being coached by the producers. So they had to change my story from being a survivor of human trafficking to being a person who essentially did this to myself and had all these losses and so on. And they even misrepresented that I had given away my children. When I saw that on camera, on the television, I just about died. It knocked the wind out of me. First of all, it was 100% false. But guess what? I'd signed a release. I'd signed a release that I couldn't sue them for anything, no matter how they twisted things and so on, because when they had my trust, I signed the release. They had sent me a treatment of how it was going to go, and the treatment was expressed the way I wanted it to go. I wanted it to help other women who had been trafficked or sexually exploited by, psychological means or whatever. So after that, I was attacked in social media. First of all, the story was false. It was humiliating and degrading and victim shaming and re-traumatizing. Then on top of that, it was worldwide. It was on many networks. And on top of that, I had to deal with, this was presented as a true story, and they even manipulated my words, like they spliced a word from here and there to make sentences that I never said. But you see my head talking in some places, then you see reenactment footage. So they could make entire sentences to manipulate the entire story so that it would fit into that series. And so all of the social media attacks it was just surreal. I went into, panic attacks, and I started having flashbacks, and it was just beyond what my brain could even make sense of. Like, why would they do this? I was a legitimate survivor. And I said on camera that I had been raped and beaten and robbed. It was psychological torture. And after all this, they tried to spin it into an entirely different story. So healing from something like this was just monumental. My therapist didn't even know how to handle this. And so for a year, I wouldn't even go outside my house alone because I was having flashbacks for a long time. And it wasn't until I found a program in media psychology, an academic program, that I thought, oh my goodness, maybe I can find a way to take this terrible experience of being shamed in the media and turn it into something positive. And I applied to this PhD program and I was accepted. From the moment I started, my focus was on trying to understand why people would do this to one another. What is the psychology of mass humiliation, public shaming? And I wanted to explain the patterns. I wanted to understand the patterns. Was it just me, or did other people also have such a difficulty processing this and healing from this and understanding human nature and why these things even happen? So that became my new drive. Keep in mind that before this happened, I had a children's project in development. It was wholesome. It was beautiful. I had all these plans, to relaunch this, but I thought, let me come out with my story first so that people understand I've been through a lot, but I still want to do this children's project. After this happened, there was just no way. There was no way. If you represent me as a person who was out doing these things of her own accord. You know, that just was too unsavory to even be associated with a children's project. But when I entered, so I had to change careers. I had to go back to school, and I made this my mission, and I really delved into it. And I'm really proud to tell you that I completed my PhD last year. I'm now 61. So I went back to school late in life, and my dissertation won the 2021 Outstanding Dissertation Award from the American Psychological Association, the Media Psychology and Technology Division. So I am still over the moon about this, because I feel like I took that terrible experience and I repurposed it. And now I'm in a position where I have real expertise about these things. And that was my own healing journey. And now I can really help people on their healing journeys as well.
Wow. I had no idea about your backstory. And firstly, thanks for sharing. Like, that's a real vulnerability that you're opening up. So, do you mind if I ask you about that? Your experience?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
How did you find yourself, like, was that as a child that you were trafficked? Like,
Oh, no, I was an adult and I had children.
Okay.
My vulnerability was my religion. And so
What's your religion?
My religion at that time was LDS, Mormon.
Okay,
and
cool.
I got lured into this fundamentalist offshoot group by this imposter. It was a man posing as my ecclesiastical leader. So all the trust was built in. But it turned out that he, in fact, was an atheist. His fiance was an atheist. All the people I thought were believers were atheists. And they were just assisting him in deceiving and manipulating me because I had so much faith in my religion. And so this was their way of trying to teach me a lesson and to exploit me in every way that a woman could be exploited. It wasn't just my body. It was my dignity, my dreams. It was I had to sell all my possessions that I loved. And, there were many levels to the deception and the exploitation. And the way that I finally got out of it, because I found myself trapped primarily through psychological chains, because I was under threat that if I did not comply, that there would be consequences to me and my children eternally. And also, I feared that I would be killed. And that was confirmed by some of his accomplices who had who came and had a big confession with me. One particular man who had been sent over to exploit me started crying afterwards, after getting to know me, and he had a change of heart. And he said, he just spilled the beans on the whole thing and saved my life. And eventually, and what happened is he gave me my life back, because I would not be here today had he not said, you know what, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. I'm going to help this young lady. And so that's what happened. And that was a very difficult story for me to even understand and recover from in and of itself. But then sharing it on camera, having all my triggers activated, the very first flashbacks I ever had were when I was being filmed and having to spend hours and hours recounting this story, every little detail. And thinking, though, that this was going to help women who've been exploited by their religious leaders, or who have gone through human trafficking that wasn't your typical story of a teenager or somebody from another country, was a totally different type. And I thought, I'm going to give them hope. I'm going to show them that they can recover from this and that something good will come from it. And to have that as my goal, which the producers knew, and then to do what they did, to misrepresent the whole thing, it just, I was seriously suicidal.
Did the people who trafficked you and psychologically manipulated and abused you, did they ever get arrested? Did they get held to account legally? Like,
no,
what happened to that?
I was hoping that maybe this episode would spur some action of some kind. I did go to the police, of course, multiple times, and try to get them held accountable. But because it had these religious overtones from the beginning, they took their time. It was Utah. Okay. In Utah, being Mormon is the thing to be. It, like, the lawmakers are Mormon and so on and so forth. And they had basically hijacked my Mormon beliefs to get that open door, that trust. But they were not in any way, shape, or form actually religious. It was just a big hoax. In fact, when I came out of this experience, I felt like I didn't know who was real, who they really, how do I say this? I didn't know if people were who they really said they were. I didn't know if the world even worked the way I thought it worked. I was so disoriented that I felt like I had come out of a video game, or maybe the Truman Show. I don't know.
Yeah, I know the film. Yeah, Jim Carrey.
Yeah, I just didn't know because everybody was an imposter.
Do you still believe in God after this journey? Do you still have your faith?
I'm no longer Mormon, but it's not because of that. I stayed Mormon for a while, but I do believe in a higher purpose, in a higher power, but I don't have the kind of spirituality where somebody would ever be able to manipulate me. I don't go to a church with any sort of dogma or control or anything like that. I just have replaced organized religion with human kindness. So my religion is human kindness.
That's beautiful. I wish more people felt that way. There seems to be so much focus on looking at all the divisions between us as human beings at this moment in time. I guess coming from political ideology and these belief systems, and human kindness seems to be at the bottom of the list of how we create positive social change. So it's nice for me to hear you say that.
Well, that's the only way to create change. I remember when I was mainstream Mormon and I had a business that was revolved around, let me say that again. I remember when I was mainstream Mormon and I had built this family enrichment business with all these, wholesome products, and how to teach children to read and how to motivate your children to do good things without striking them in any way, how to use positive psychology with your children. And it was just really positive. And I had attracted all these Christians, these actually born again Christians to my business because it's a very compatible thing. Family values and Christianity. But when they learned, when my sales distributors, I got up to about 800 sales representatives in my company selling my products. And they, for some reason, the fact that I went to Brigham Young University, which was a Mormon university, became an issue with them. Not like I hid it from them, but then I was canceled back then, and I had these born again Christians attacking me for being Mormon, which is also LDS, which stands for Latter-day Saints. So they were attacking me, saying I was in a cult, and wanted, they even picketed in my presentations and or the presentations of my other sales distributors, and they were all leaving in droves. And I remember thinking, I'm having a crisis of faith about Mormonism right now. Maybe Christianity, mainstream Christianity, is the way to go. But after those attacks, I thought, I don't want to become like the people attacking me.
Yeah, word. To me, increasingly, it strikes that any super rigid dogma or doctrine, whether it's political or religious, is not good for us as human beings. Like when we have to live by these super firm and flexible belief structures, it actually dehumanizes us. Do you think that's true?
Oh, without question. And I do want to say that I do, consider myself a Christian in some kind of very basic way. I don't have a bad feeling towards born again Christians, but the metaphor was that if you think that attacking a person is going to make them change to adopt your ideology, that just doesn't work. So, like, which person do you know that ever changed their mind because somebody humiliated them publicly?
Yeah. I have this conversation all the time because my offline work is around behavior change, essentially, and helping men in particular reflect on, I guess, some of the sociological drivers of masculinity and manhood, and why do we need to be tough and sexually promiscuous and use violence and brag about like our gold chains and all these sorts of things, which the American Psychological Association would tell you cause psychological distress and the drivers of family violence and homicidal violence and self-harming behavior. And nowhere in my work for nearly 10 years have I seen humiliation and public shaming be effective in changing someone's ideas about themselves or their behaviors. It's actually like kindness and compassion and patience and non-judgment, which lead people to pathways of change. And that's where I've become disillusioned with the illiberalism of the modern progressive movement, because it's all about social exclusion and excommunication and towing a particular ideological party line across a broad range of really, really nuanced topics. And if you slip up, then game over. You get excluded offline and online. Like, you will lose your community and your friendships and increasingly your work and your business. So it's interesting for me to hear your parallels with my understandings of politics and society and your religious experiences, and have that, it's not just a metaphor. Like, there seems to be real overlaps between that. So that, I guess, leads you to having done a whole lot of academic research, which has been recognized by the American Psychological Association. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I'm still so happy about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm going to go Google that and find that. So why are people like this? Why are people so caught up in shaming and excluding and harassing other people who don't fit into the approved belief structures? Why is that?
Well, one theory is that we do that for social control, that society evolved even from, the caveman days to need mechanisms of social control. So to shame people would cause them to either change or be excommunicated from the community, which in, centuries ago would mean death. So we're hardwired to belong to, to want to belong to a group and to humanity. But we don't understand that when we try to belong more deeply, when we want acceptance by a certain community, if we do that by attacking another person, that it might get us some more likes, some more social acceptance, but we don't understand the cost to the person that we are destroying. We might think it's just one mean comment, it's not going to really matter, or one article, big deal. But to that person, it's not just traumatic. It's not just traumatic. It's traumatic in a way that I call PTSD on steroids, because neuroscience shows humiliation to be the most intense human emotion. And we all remember those moments from middle school or junior high when we were humiliated. Those moments stick with us. Why do they last? Why do they stick? Well, they're very, very painful, and they get encoded in our brains. And then we get sensitive about being reminded of those issues. So with humiliation being so painful and long lasting, you would think that society would really be caring about one another. It's like every human being practically has their biggest fear to be publicly humiliated. If we think about ourselves being canceled or being publicly shamed, it's like a nightmare. And by participating in somebody else's cancellation, we're sending a message that, hey, we're on the right team. Don't cancel me because I'm agreeing with all you guys that are canceling this person. It doesn't matter if no due diligence was done. It doesn't matter if there's no evidence. It doesn't matter if it's completely false. Once the pile-on starts, we get social clout by contributing to someone else's demise. And it's horrifying to me to think that a person is trying to elevate their own personal status at the cost of another person's life. And in some cases, Richie, it does cost a human life. I keep a database of people who committed suicide over public shaming, humiliation, cyberbullying, and I'm talking about adults. It impacts adults in just as painful of a way as cyberbullying does young children. I mean, we can't make a one-on-one comparison because an adolescent brain is super sensitive, but my message is that adults are just as traumatized as can be, and it impacts not just their social acceptance. But let's talk about some of the other consequences to being publicly misrepresented and humiliation. So we know there's the attack on the employers or on the family members or on anyone who dares defend their friend from these false allegations.
So for someone listening to this or who is watching this and they're not familiar with what you're talking about, with an attack, what are you talking about here? What does that look like?
Okay, let's suppose that somebody was accused of being insensitive to a person of color. What happens is, no, what should happen is that the person who was offended should call that person in privately and have a discussion, and then there could be, some sincere apologies and behavior change. But what happens instead is, too often, the first resort when someone is offended is to go to the press or to make a public call out. And in many cases, the call out may be justified. I mean, and at least the behavior might be something that should be corrected, but having it be public is inappropriate because there becomes a cyber mob, a pile-on, and then everyone searches their memory bank for any interaction they've had with this person, and their brain tries to find things that are related. And the next thing you know, this person who maybe never even did the thing they were accused of, or who did do something inappropriate, but it was something correctable, now they are robbed of the opportunity to really make amends because it's so public. Any apology that they might exhibit will be dismissed as performative or as insincere. Any work that they do to become more sensitive in the issue where they were an offender, well, that will be dismissed also as, well, you only did it because you were called out. You don't really mean it. There is really no path back to redemption. There's no path back to be embraced by society. And this is just inhumane. It's like gladiator times or the Salem witch trials. We make an accusation and it doesn't matter what your response is, and it does not matter if it was true or false. What matters is there was an accusation and now your life is over.
Have we always been like this as humans? Because when I see this happening to people online, I think of people being locked in their stocks or crowds of people in medieval England gathering around to watch someone get hung, or I think of stonings, or I think of throwing witches in the lake to watch them drown. Have we always been like this?
Not always. I believe it's come in cycles. When the United States was in its infancy, the punishment included the whipping post and the stocks and so on. And one of the founding fathers of the United States Constitution, his name was Benjamin Rush. And he signed his name on on the amazing document. But he wrote back in, I think it was 1787, I might be wrong, but he wrote that public punishments are counterproductive. We need to stop this. He pointed out how once a person has been so publicly punished, their desire to change is gone. They have no sense of dignity anymore. They're no longer a productive member of society. And why are we doing this to people? So this was, in the 1780s. Well, we're doing the same thing now. We don't use whipping posts and stocks, but we in a way, what we do is completely similar, because we take a person and we put him in the town square of the internet, and we all throw rocks at them, and we pelt them, and we laugh at them, and we jeer at them, only we never let them out of their stocks to go back home and recover. This is now potentially a permanent stain, just like a brand on their forehead, which they used to do. This is now a permanent stain on their character. How can you expect a person who's gone through such a traumatic, humiliating experience to, suddenly want to become a productive member of the society which hated him?
I always think that. I worry about how there's going to be a backlash to this moment in time eventually, because I often see politically agnostic people, politically moderate people, even like progressive leaning people, in fact, particularly progressive left-leaning people, often at the bottom of these pylons that you're talking about, and they've committed some thought crime or whatever. And it pushes them away from the very causes that they might either be open to exploring and being an ally to, down the other end of the political spectrum. And I think that other end of the political spectrum is very cancerous and socially corrosive and violent. If you think about the Capitol riots, for example, and how that online radicalization happens. Do you think that people involved in cancer culture, considering that they're going to be part of radicalizing a group of people for the worse?
Oh, I don't think they consider that at all. Let me disclose, I am a progressive. I'm not alt-right.
And that's the thing that happens, right? Like, I'm a progressive too. I've literally been on television in New Zealand advocating for like gay marriage and stopping domestic violence and decriminalization of drug laws. And New Zealand's a small country. And when you put yourself on a national platform doing that, like, a lot of people become aware of what your politics and your views are. And now I critique cancel culture, and I critique the extremism of the illiberal left, and people are like, oh, he's suddenly right wing, and he's like,
no,
like, why is he part of the intellectual dark web, and think that I've suddenly renounced my beliefs and values, which I haven't. I'm as passionate about wanting a more just, equitable society as I've ever been.
Exactly. The most progressive thing we could do is not victimize people. So we support the victims, and I support victims. I have been a victim so many times. I believe victims, I support victims, but what I do not approve of is creating new victims in this radical way of trying to make existing victims somehow feel supported. I don't want anybody to do this to anybody that has harmed me. I don't think creating new victims, sort of like an eye for an eye, that doesn't work for me. I don't even think that that's, the way we do it is technically a violation of human rights if you believe in the values set forth by the United Declaration of Human Rights, because it states that all people deserve due process, that people have the right to live their lives in safety without fear of destruction to their reputation, that they have the right to, participate in the arts and all these things. So what we do as a group when we are angry that someone has allegedly been an abuser, as we take it upon ourselves to destroy that person's life without examining the evidence. It's an accusation and you're gone. And I don't agree with that. That is not, it's not fair. It's not just, it's not transformative justice to do this. The best way to support victims is to create, hopefully, new systems that will prevent such victimizations and to, enable that victim to be a part of the restoration process, but we don't do that. If somebody has committed an offense, they don't really get the chance to make things right. They're gone. We've thrown them to the lions. I mean, I have people that call me that are going through these kinds of experiences, being canceled, being publicly misrepresented, almost every other day. I hear endless stories. And I'm interested in them because I study this. And I think the reason people have an issue with thinking you've gone alt-right or something is because they don't really know what cancel culture does. They think that it is only about supporting a victim and getting an abuser off the street. What they don't know is that so many times the cancellation is not even about an allegation of abuse. The cancellation was from an offense. Somebody offended somebody, or somebody is weaponizing cancel culture to get a business advantage. I've seen that multiple times. Cancel culture is now a tool that's being used to just rob people of their humanity and of their opportunity to flourish and thrive in the world. It is so traumatizing that I say to people, you really don't understand it unless you've been through it.
What do you mean by a business advantage? Like, what's an example of that?
Say it again.
What do you mean by someone using cancel culture or online humiliation as a tool of business advantage?
Oh, well, I'll give you an example. I know of a case where there was a business and the business competitor made allegations against the original business and created just mobs of people angry and attacking the business and trying to destroy it, leaving bad reviews, and then wanting to take the IP of the original business. And they put it in writing, and it's a legal case. And, you know, it was investigated, and it turned out that the original allegations were really motivated by an agenda. And I've seen that multiple times. But that's what I mean. You can make an allegation against a business, it be false, but people don't do due diligence. So I plead with people, you know, either do your due diligence and before you, here, let me start over on that. I wish people really knew how devastating this experience is. It's really difficult to survive. It is almost like a death sentence to people. And before they add their comment or their social media attack to show how righteous they are and how part of the group they are, they're going to help cast that stone on that person being stoned. Before they do that, I want them to think, what if it was them? What if it was somebody you loved? What if you knew these things weren't true? And every single comment is another wound to the person. And sometimes these wounds are too much for people to bear. I just beg for people to be more kind online and give people the opportunity to make amends. Give them the opportunity to do whatever work they need to do, you know, and then come back to society welcomed. Even Benjamin Rush in the 1780s talked about how after somebody has been punished publicly, after they've paid their dues, we need to welcome them back into society. Well, if you're a person who's gone through this media misrepresentation and humiliation, there is no path where you're welcomed back. There's no clear path. It's rare when this happens. So I just want all of us to think slower, to take our time to think, what is this going to do to that person's life. It takes their financial stability. Many times they have to move, or they lose their housing because they lose their money. They lose their opportunity for healthcare in some countries. Like the United States, you have to pay for your own healthcare. They lose their sense of purpose and life meaning. Their dreams are obliterated. Their life legacy that they were going to leave to their children has been completely rewritten by people who don't even know them. Their reputation is their economic foundation. Now that's destroyed. They have unwanted changes in their life world. They are so traumatized, they have to get professional help. And without money, oftentimes they can't. We're destroying the mental health of people who could have been incredible warriors for good. You know, when people, for example, that have progressive values, you know, attack other people, and we see this backfiring, it's not going to backfire in the future. It's backfiring now. We're losing great members of the team. Whether you're progressive or conservative, I'm conservative in some ways too. So, but we just need to be a more decent society, stop humiliating people. And if somebody needs a correction, it's a private conversation.
Is that a path forward? Like, how do we change this cultural dynamic? Because I do see, I think sometimes I wonder if we're heading towards peak cancel culture. Like, I see a lot of different voices, not a lot, but I see different voices online starting to have more nuanced, balanced, humane, heart-focused, heart-centered conversations around this. But I'm curious to know, like, how do we elevate those voices? How do we shift this? How do we create a more compassionate online culture, which has at the moment become like a really ugly, vicious place? And there are huge businesses, obviously, that profit, you know, behind the algorithm. So
Right.
what's the way forward for us?
We're doing it. We're talking right now on a podcast. The more we can get this information out there, the more people that are in a position to make laws or have influence or write media stories, the more that they know how truly devastating it is to go through this experience. It's not a slap on the hand. It's essentially the end of life as a person knew it. And so if each person who hears this just slows down when they see something that really makes them upset and says, you know, I can be civil about this. You can make a comment, make it civilly. You can ask for a correction. You can share your point of view. You don't have to attack a person's character or attack their, you know, their livelihood. If somebody does something wrong, just say, you know, it might have gone better if you would have had better customer service. You know, I mean, you can be decent about it. But this public hunger to see people go from their success to lying in fetal position in their bedroom, wondering if they're ever going to be able to go out in public again. This is really hard. And it's really hard also when you go through a cancellation or a misrepresentation and you are in this situation where you're just bleeding trauma and you're crying for help, but everyone is too afraid to help you. It's like you are dying from a wound on the highway. And instead of people rushing out to pick you up and carry you off the road so you don't get run over by a car, they sit there and laugh and say, you deserved it because, you did say something that was a little bit flawed, and laughing, and patting each other on the back. We really took care of that. Now I have a stronger relationship with all these people on the side of the road because we did it. We showed that person that comment was just so horrific that, they don't even deserve to live. That's the message we're sending. Is that am I being over dramatic?
No.
You okay?
No, you're right. I mean, we've talked before once, and I've been on the bottom end of that sort of online attack, and you're right. And I don't think people really understand how those sorts of prolonged attacks aren't just rational, logical, political disagreement or asking for a clarification or agreeing to disagree around a point. It kind of bypasses all your normal human defense mechanisms that you build up over a lifetime to keep yourself psychologically and emotionally safe. It's very, I think you're right in that you can't understand it until you've experienced it, which is why you see so many people even laughing about, oh, cancel culture is not a thing, like it doesn't exist, who's really being canceled? And they think of big names like Dave Chappelle or celebrities who've got millions of dollars, and people are like, well, they're still rich and powerful, but that's not what we're talking about here. There's a difference between a company being publicly censured for legitimately doing something wrong, breaking and humiliating and abusing someone emotionally and psychologically over perceived wrong thought or a false allegation. So I think you're dead right. And I really appreciate that you've taken the worst trauma that I can think of, being raped and trafficked, into your driver for helping other people. I think that's really admirable. And I want to say thanks for your work. And I'm happy to hear that it's being recognized. And potentially you'll be passing a torch to other people. Like other people will be exploring these themes academically and professionally. And maybe you have been the catalyst for that.
Oh, that would be a dream. I hope that the people listening will have these conversations with their friends and just really reconsider whether they want to participate in that cancellation. And in fact, what would be nice is if when you see somebody being attacked online, offer some support, because you just don't know where the mental health of that person is, because it is so painful. It's almost indescribable.
Where can people find you? Where can people look up your work? Where can people get more advice about these things? Yeah.
Okay, so my website is christinemarie.com, spelled with a C, Christine Marie, normal spelling of Christina Marie. My Instagram is Dr. Christine Marie with a period after the R, so like Dr. period or dot Christine Marie. And you can find me in those two places. And I do want anybody who has gone through this and feels like nobody understands them or gets it, I want them to feel free to reach out to me, because I do respond. And I do some life and story coaching, because after your life story is destroyed, you have to recover your sense of who you are, your identity. You have to integrate this horrible story into your life somehow. And I can help people with that. And so I'm grateful that you had me on to talk about my research. I, if you guys are nerdy, you can read my dissertation.
I'm quite nerdy. I'm actually writing my own dissertation right now, so I'm not sure I have time to read yours, but I will eventually.
Well, what is it on? Tell me.
Well, I'm writing about social constructs of masculinity and how mainstream hip hop music impacts that. So I'm looking at, kind of what, the American Psychological Association came out a couple of years back and talked about the man box and stereotypical norms of manhood being psychologically damaging for us, right? And that's the sort of stuff that I do in my work, and I wanted to put a deeper academic understanding behind that. And as a fan of hip hop music my whole life, and a guy who is in very stereotypically alpha male spaces as a kickboxing and Muay Thai and boxing coach who grew up fighting people for fun and sport, I'm curious about that. And I want to help other men understand that you can be into sports and music and stuff, but that is even quote unquote problematic, but you don't have to internalize those narratives. You don't have to act on these behaviors. Like, you need a critical filter and a lens that you can experience the world through, so you don't incorporate that into who you are. Because I see so many men struggling behind the mask of culturally enforced manhood, and they self-destruct or they hurt the people around them. And I want to play a small part in changing that. Hence, going back to school myself and doing my master's degree.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Yo, thank you.
I'm so excited. I'm excited about this.
I'm very behind. Like, I mean to have written a far more words than I have, but we'll get there eventually. Hey, this has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Anything you want to say before we peace out?
Yeah, human kindness, everyone.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate your time and your work and your compassionate approach to the human experience.
Thank you.